Nashville could use so many hands in so many places that when people are feeling disconnected, I promise there are places for you to get in there and work towards a more connected, a more diverse, a more unified Nashville, but you have to see it.
Alisha Haddock believes in her city. And when she talks about a more unified Nashville, she really does see it. Of course, she knows Nashville has real problems, but for her, it's all about working on those problems together. Talk to her for even just a few minutes, and that optimism really shines through. Alisha was recently named Executive Director of the community nonprofit Neighbor to Neighbor. And it's the most recent in a string of service-minded positions she's held over the years. Alisha's roots run deep in North Nashville. So much so, there's a portrait of her grandmother in Elizabeth Park. Alongside 4 other prominent women of the community, there is Ms. Nora Ransom. Alisha met up with producer Steve Harouche there on a blustery January morning, and she brought along a special guest, her mother, Nora Ransom's daughter.
People come through, cut through, and they notice these women on the wall. Mrs. Watson was a good friend of my mother's. That's Miss Watson. She was a good friend of my mother. They were friends for a long time, and I'm proud of her. My mother was in a community club, and I really, we were young. I really don't know the name of the club and whatever, but she was in the club for many years. We had meetings at our house. We couldn't wait because there was all kinds of food. Prime rib, you name it. So yes, we did. She had when it was her turn, because they swapped up. And when it was her time, it was every last one of those people came. And we were there too to help. So we enjoyed that as well. We enjoyed it with her. Now, my name is Abanda Ransom Smith. I'm Mrs. Nora Ransom's daughter. I'm her 7th child. She had 11 children. We grew up here out in North Nashville on 11th Avenue North. Everyone's mom was everyone's mom. My husband used to go there. We were dating at the time, and he called her mother. He'd go, "Mama, what you cook for dinner?" His friends would come with him because he had told them how well she cooked. And, "Mama, we gonna eat today? What we gonna eat?" They all came over on Sunday. So she never pushed anybody away.
I'm Demetria Kaladimos. It's Banner and Company. We love to have lifelong Nashvillians talk about the city of their youth. So paint me a picture. What was going on when you were growing up here?
Oh my goodness. I am from North Nashville, right? The old school North Nashville, where Bud's Hardware was where we went to get kerosene for the kerosene heaters in my grandmother's home. It was one of those times in the late 70s and 80s where the neighborhood was, tip top. Everyone knew everyone. It was nostalgic, right? Where you knew that when you were riding down the street, you could wave and it could be, the barber, or my mom grew up around the corner from Oprah Winfrey, right? And it was one of those things where North Nashville was just tops, right? Basketball players, high school basketball players were, filled the streets. And as they were getting older, you still knew who they were. Like you knew the people in our community, the ones that made a difference. And it's centered around church, right? So I was a church kid, born in the church. That's where my parents met. And so it was always a part of my life. Just as North Nashville was, we went to church 2 streets over. and my grandfather was the pastor, and it was church was the center of our community, right? 14th Avenue Missionary Baptist Church. It was the center of our community. And so, growing up a PK, but then also a grandma's, baby. My grandmother was very influential in my life, both of them on both of my mom's side and my dad's side. So very, very strong family background, very family oriented, proud North Nashvilleian, wanted to make sure that everyone's story didn't end up the same.
Yeah.
It was, your story is very personal to you. And so I realized that at a very early age.
Did you get the feeling that your part of town was neglected in any way?
Yes, I knew it, right? I knew it from a small child. We would ride down the street, and as we are waving, to our neighbors, I still understood that my community was underdeveloped. I understood that when you were in certain parts of North Nashville, it wasn't the fault. It wasn't always the fault of our neighbor, right? Like, it wasn't their fault that they may have been having, a hard time or anything, drug abuse, whatever the issue was. I knew that it wasn't solely that person's fault. I knew that poverty, right, played a part in it. And I learned poverty is a matter of justice. And so I grew up knowing that, and then I was able to put words to it as I began my professional career, my volunteer career. Just when I started to get out to move around, I knew what I saw as a child was exactly what it was.
When you would visit other parts of the city for a school event or something, did you notice amenities or things that you wish you had at your disposal?
The funny thing about that is that I knew that things were different, but we always had what we needed, right? And so that was the difference. It was making something out of nothing.
Yep.
It was one of those things where we were very resourceful. Like, North Nashville is a very resilient community. And so it did not just become resilient in the last 20 years. It's always been resilient. So we had the best of the best, even being an undeveloped community, even being under-resourced. And I think that was partly because of the people that made up North Nashville, right? And so that's how we were able to, we noticed that things were different in certain neighborhoods, but we also knew how to use what we had to make sure that we had what we needed.
Where'd you go to high school?
I went to Whites Creek Comprehensive High School. Go Cobras.
It was newish when you went, right?
Well, it probably was about 20 years old by the time I got there. My cousins went there. My uncle went there. So by the time I got to Whites Creek, it was still, it still had that old feel. I don't think it feels like that anymore with the Gen Z and the millennials, but it was on the newer side. But eventually we moved across the bridge, is what we would call it, into the Bordeaux, Kings Lane area. And I was able to go to Whites Creek and graduate very proudly. And it was one of those things where my surroundings, where I grew up, it went from far as North Nashville could go all the way to, I don't know, maybe the Jolton border. So I was able to really grow up, in all of North Nashville.
Did you ever have the itch to leave?
Yes, I did. I went, and I left in my early 20s. I went all the way to Madison, Tennessee.
Oh.
And and that's as far as I've moved since I'm a native Nashvilleian. I always used to say I wanted to move to Texas, but I never have. I've never left Nashville.
It's been a few years now, but remind us why the 37208 zip code made news nationally for its inequality.
Yes. So in 2018, the Brookings Institute released a report stating that North Nashville 37208 had the highest incarceration rate in the nation per capita per zip code.
Did that shock you?
No, it didn't. I was working at the Magruder Center as the director then, and it really just supported what we already knew and what we had already been working on. We understood that, policing, if you will, in North Nashville was very different than other parts of Nashville, where we were being over policed. And so when that study came out, it supported, right, the work we had been doing. And so that's when people started to pay attention. That's when we had all of Nashville, all of Tennessee, all of the nation asking, how does this community, right, historically African-American community,
that always took care of its own.
That always took care of its own. How do they have the highest incarceration rate? And so the Driving While Black report, that supported those statistics, but it really wasn't a shocker. I was just glad someone was able to put it out there so people can understand, and they did understand the work that we were doing.
Yeah. I'm curious, your tight-knit North Nashville neighborhood, how much of it still exists and was handed down generation to generation, or is it a whole new group of people because of gentrification?
I don't think it's a whole new group of people. We still have the fabric of North Nashville. The essence is still there. But is it gentrified? Yes. Are we struggling to hold on to the culture of North Nashville and the uniqueness that we hold? Sort of. But it's still there, right? I ride through, I still see some of the people in the community that I've known for all my life, and that's a good thing, right? That feeling of neighborly love is a good thing. Ed's Fish is still there. Every TSU alum across the world will come back and make sure that they visit certain places in North Nashville, especially along Jefferson Street, and those historic spots that were gathering places for us. So yes, we are holding on to our tight-knit community, but it is changing.
I'm Demetria Kaladimos. It's Banner and Company. We'll be right back.
Don't miss out on the last few weeks of football action with Prize Picks, the best place to win cash while watching the playoffs. The app is simple. Pick more or less on at least 2 players for a shot to win up to 1,000 times your cash. Download the Prize Picks Daily Fantasy Sports app today and use code FIELD and get $50 instantly when you play $5. That's code FIELD on Prize Picks to get $50 instantly when you play $5. You don't even need to win to receive the $50 bonus. It's guaranteed. Prize Picks, run your game. Must be present in certain states. Visit prizepicks.com for restrictions and details.
How did you then transition into the affordable housing realm? And that has had to be sort of a double-edged thing. There's got to be a lot of frustration in that work.
It is. And I knew that going in. That's probably why I chose to go into affordable housing.
You like a challenge?
I do. I love a challenge, if you can't tell. I was working at the Magruder Center, and Judge Rachel Bell had brought her community court over to the Magruder Center. That was their new home, and we were thinking about, what could this new thing be? It was right around 2019, and I suggested that housing was a huge issue in North Nashville.
What were you seeing?
I was seeing a lot of people being displaced. I would see a lot of our neighbors being pushed out, and not just to the outer edges of Davidson County. They were being pushed to neighboring counties, right? Even counties 2 or 3 places over from Davidson County. And so when I saw that, and I understood that they didn't know how to live anywhere else other than Nashville, right? North Nashville. And that was a problem because they were unprepared. And so what I began to do is prepare our neighbors who had to move to live in a new place, right? How do you function in these new spaces? And so that's kind of how it started. We had the housing court, did not know that COVID or the tornado of 2020, if it would be rearing its ugly head. but we were prepared for that because we saw where housing was going and how it was trending and really how volatile it was, right? And so it was pretty bad in 2019. And so by the time 2021 came, I had made a decision to go into affordable housing full time because I could not understand why we kept hearing we're building affordable housing. There's places for people to live, but I saw our people being pushed out, they couldn't even live in Davidson County. So I needed to see what was behind the curtains, like what is really going on, because these stories aren't matching. And so that's why I took a big step and I ventured over to affordable housing.
You mentioned the housing court. Mm-hmm. What was that? Give me just a thumbnail sketch of that.
Yeah, that was so the court was designed to help people or soften evictions if they needed resources, if the people needed resources who may be facing eviction, they were able and had time to get the resources that they needed. And if things could not be worked out, then maybe we would negotiate if it wouldn't be on their background, an eviction wouldn't be on their background.
So they could start fresh.
So they can start fresh, because what we were seeing was people were being evicted and then they couldn't get another place to live. And that wasn't helping the situation. And it was one of those things where people were being underpaid. We were feeling the crunch, right? Underpaid, but they were being overworked. And so they had kids, they were sleeping in their cars. It was very, very, a very hard time for a lot of Nashvillians. And I don't think people really understood that or knew that until we got into the pandemic and people were laid off and they couldn't work and we could not go outside. And then more people started to experience what people were experiencing way before the pandemic.
I think most people in town know that we have a huge demand and a small supply.
Yes.
Are there any successes? Is any progress being made in your eyes? Because you were very close to it.
Yes, I was. And I would say yes. And that's just because, like I said, I wanted to go behind the curtains and see what was happening. And people are building affordable housing, affordable units for rent and to sell. But like you said, the supply, we're not building fast enough in some instances, but we are building. People are trying to come back to Nashville now, right? And so now we're still having that same problem that we were having a few years ago. And so what I would say is when we had the inclusionary zoning law to be struck down by the state, I think that really hurt us. But giving people an opportunity to include affordable units in different properties that they're building, I think when people take advantage of that, that means everybody's participating. So people can play a part in making sure that we have affordable housing for, our essential workers, for people who we know we need in our workforce, but they have to know that it's their choice to do it. And I think people are learning that. It could be happening a little slower than what we would like, but it is happening.
Are people just plain opposed to multifamily housing in some areas?
I think
and if so, why?
I do. I think so. I think we still have a lot of NIMBYs, as we call them, not in my backyard.
Right.
And that's because of I believe, the preservation part of development, right? How do we preserve the character of our neighborhoods? How do we preserve the culture of our neighborhoods? But even though that's a big question, and I think it should be addressed, right, because of cultural preservation, I also think that we have to make sure that we're making room for people who want to live in Nashville, right? So all growth is not bad. And so how do we get people to say yes in my backyard? We bring them into the conversation, right? We help them to understand that if we don't do this, then a lot of your amenities will not be the same, and you will actually lose them. And so we have to do this thing together. And so what I'm looking at is really kind of changing and shaping the narrative of what that looks like for your everyday life. That could be your son or your daughter that you're preventing from living in your community. It's that close to home now.
When community oversight of MNPD changed to community review because of actions by the legislature, that had to be a big disappointment.
It was. It was a big disappointment. It was a big deal. 135,000 people voted for the Community Oversight Board. And to get that, turned over on its head was a pretty huge blow. And then essentially, really, no one coming to the aid of the Community Oversight Board. We had to stand up and fight for ourselves, and we had to fight for the 135,000 people that voted for oversight. And all that means is we want transparency and accountability. A lot of people want to frame it as the COB or the CRB is anti-police, but that couldn't be further from the truth. It's always and always has been about accountability and transparency and even integrity in how we police our communities, how public safety is administered in Nashville. That is the goal. And so when that oversight abolishment came from the state, it really did set us back, if you will, in terms of oversight. Across the country is being attacked. But Nashville, it really served as a blueprint in the South in how to roll back accountability and transparency in public safety.
Do you foresee a time when the original powers of the board might be restored?
I always have held on to the restoration of the investigatory powers that the Oversight Board initially had. I think we do ourselves a disservice if we believe that we will not get back to that point. We are headed in a world and headed to a place where oversight and accountability will be normal, but it's going to take a lot for us to get there. When you have issues like George Floyd in 2020 and Sandra Massey just a couple of months ago, those are pains and heartaches from a community that has experienced police brutality for hundreds of years. And so what does that look like moving forward in how we police our neighborhoods, how we police our communities? That's going to be critically important. It's critically important now, but I think the way our society is going, the way the advancement of technology, we're moving into a space where we will not be able to avoid accountability and transparency.
You're listening to Banner and Company. My guest is Alisha Haddock. We'll be right back. That brings us to Neighbor to Neighbor.
Neighbor to Neighbor is 27 years old.
Really?
Yes, it is.
Okay, I had no idea.
It is a wonderful nonprofit that started in our MDHA, in our local government. But what we wanted to do with Neighbor to Neighbor is ensure that people, neighbors, neighborhood organizations had the tools that they needed to preserve and improve the quality of life within their neighborhoods, right? It's about connecting communities. And so that was one of the things that Neighbor to Neighbor really is built on, right? One of the main pillars is connecting communities. And so imagine now how the community is. Remember when we grew up, we knew who our neighbors were. We knew who was across the street, down the street, 2 streets over, 3 streets over. Now, not as much. And so I think that has brought us to a point where we don't even know our neighbors. So right now, as we are looking at really revitalizing neighbor to neighbor and pushing us forward into a new Nashville, right? It looks different. It feels a little different. How do we engage with our neighbors that are from all over the place, right? From California and New York. We have to embrace the people that are here, but still culturally preserve our community so we won't forget the heritage and the special and unique characteristics of our communities. And I think Neighbor to Neighbor is poised to help do that in a way that hasn't been done before. We have the experience and we have the foundation that has already been laid to help Nashville move forward.
You know, I think I've been here for 40 years, but I can recall a time when we didn't say, oh, I live in Edge Hill, or I live in Green Hills.
Sobro.
Or Sobro, or WeHo.
Right.
You know, and some people laugh, but honestly, I think drawing those boundaries, or at least recognizing those boundaries, has a collective pride effect.
It does. It does. And
saying, I'm part of this group.
And, you know, and it's different for a lot of us, especially the native Nashvillians, because we may have called it something else.
Right.
But I had to look at this a little bit differently. And this didn't just happen overnight. It didn't happen overnight because I've seen the effects of growth on people who were facing challenges, right? Being underemployed and, you know, the poverty that sometimes will get to our native Nashvillians. I've seen how hard that has been for preserving communities and preserving affordable housing. So there we are with that word again, because a lot of that growth has pushed out some of our existing neighbors. And so that means a lot, even when we are welcoming new people, even when we're drawing new lines and new boundaries. I think coming to the table and talking about that would be well worth that kind of work, just because some people aren't comfortable, right, with these new boundaries. But like I said, growth is a good thing. And so how do we come together to make a difference?
Seems to me like Neighbor to Neighbor is almost like a school in a way.
A little bit it is, because we have neighborhood leadership trainings. We have training classes, resources for people to help transform their communities. Imagine being in a community for 40 years and nothing has really changed, right? You may have one or two new stores or a couple of new businesses, but that's about it. So what about having vibrant communities and neighborhoods? Like, that's a real need. And people are talking about these things in their neighborhoods and in their communities. And Neighbor to Neighbor is poised to help people transform their communities today.
And you think that it's that grassroots, it's those people in the homes that can affect that change and to bring that power to bear, saying we want better.
That's right. I think it's people power, right? We have more power than we give ourselves credit for. It's the neighbors, right, that make up the city. It's the cities that make up the state. And so how do we harness that power and create change within our neighborhoods and our communities? We come together, and that's how we do it. And Neighbor to Neighbor has really gotten good at bringing people together, bringing neighbors together to affect change in that way.
Have you guys come up with any novel ideas that you hadn't heard of before?
Yeah, well, we're working on some now. I think a really interesting opportunity is the Imagine Nashville initiative. I believe it is going to be a game changer for neighborhoods in Nashville, setting out a plan where people now get to inform what's happening, 10, 20 years from now is extraordinary, right? To build something that other people will also enjoy is extraordinary. And so I think with Imagine Nashville, with Neighbor to Neighbor, we get to help transform the new Nashville in ways that we want to see and not someone telling us what we need.
When Imagine Nashville was first coming out, I heard some people, maybe some cynical people, say, oh, I remember Nashville Next. And, we had a grand plan and no one kind of ever followed up. Do you have higher hopes for this one?
I do. I have higher hopes for this one. And just because some of the Nashville Next plans, a lot of people used them. And so we can go back and we can look and see some of the progress that was made. But I think now when you involve people who will be here for another 20 years, right? Going back to your young people, when you engage youth and young people in some of these plans, after they come back from college, they have somewhere to come back to because they've contributed to what it looks like and what it feels like. And that's the difference between Nashville Next and Imagine Nashville. We had a great number of youth to play a part in shaping what we have now as Imagine Nashville.
We had one guest here on Banner and Company who theorized that there are too many nonprofits in Nashville. And some are duplicating efforts, and some, that we might benefit from maybe joining together, becoming more lean. What's your feeling about that?
I think in times where, we always hit a point where people want to do good work, and we are going to go head first into making sure that our dreams, aspirations, our visions are cast out. But I think we always get back to a point where we understand where the synergy is, right? How we come together, how we collaborate. And I think that may be the time now that we're at, right? We want to understand that the work is being done, but sometimes it's hard to see, right? That impact is hard to see. So how do you get the impact that you are trying to achieve with your organization or with the organization of, a counterpart? But I also will say it is a lot of nonprofits. And we would jokingly call it the nonprofit industrial complex because sometimes it would feel like it was doing more harm than it was good. And so we probably, it would be good for us to take some time to reassess and look at the work that we're doing to make sure that it's achieving the impact that we set it out to do.
Does all your positivity come from your church rearing?
It does. It does, because things are bad, right? And I understand that. I mean, it is depending on who you are, where you live, what you look like, it can be really bad for you. And so knowing that, going in, understanding that is why I have to be hopeful, right? Like why I try to find the hope in the situation, because if we focused on everything that was bad, then we wouldn't get anywhere.
This pull towards social work, toward community activist work, was that always your plan?
No, it actually wasn't. I have a background in higher education, but it was always about service, right? It may not have been social services or, particularly working inside the community, but it was always about service to people. So if it were, students, right? Or if it was some elderly, it just didn't matter. Wherever I found myself, I was serving. And so I think that's what stuck with me, and that's how I was raised, because I was raised in the church, right? And so it was always about Jesus, serving or doing something for someone else. And so that's what stuck. And it did not matter if I was in North Nashville or wherever I would be. I would always be intentional about serving my neighbors.
Banner and Company is a production of the New Nashville Banner. Our producers are Steve Harouche and Andrea Tudhope. Original music is by Verlin Thompson. You can subscribe wherever you get your podcasts or go to NashvilleBanner.com. You're in good company. We do a thing here where our final question
Okay.
comes from a previous guest.
Oh, so
Yeah, pick
in
it out
here?
of the fishbowl there. Whichever one.
All right, let's see
Read
what
it,
we
give it
have.
some thought.
Okay. From Marty Sletsky. What's the best?
What's the best money you ever spent?
Let's see. The best money I've ever spent. Oh, the best money I've ever spent was my first home that I purchased in North Nashville, and it was mine. And so it was in the early 2000s, and I wanted to buy a home, and I was able to purchase it in the neighborhood that I was born in. So that was probably the best money I've ever spent.
Great. Do you know the roots of the house? I mean,
I do. I remember when they were building the house. I was alive when they were building the house. I remember when it was just vacant land, and I would ride in the car and I would look at them as they were building the home, and I'd say, "Boy, that looks like a nice place to live." And I grew up, 20 years later, and I live there.
that's a great Nashville story.
I mean, I didn't know that it would happen, but I felt very connected to my community and had no idea that I would be moving back to North Nashville, but I was able to do it.